Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 12th of December 2023. Before we get to the frontline, please check out the key to what my map means, what the lines on my map means. Thank you so much to JR who has yet again done the mapping for today. I'm just insanely busy, and so it's such an incredible help when members of the community help out like this, so thank you. Right, we'll go to the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea first of all, and it's worth popping into the Kiev Independent, who reports on the Ukrainian commander Syrsky, who has said that essentially Moscow has been concentrating a large force at the Kupiansk-Lyman axis in the northeastern area since the summer. Heavy engagements and shelling have been a common occurrence. Russian forces suffered heavy losses in recent attacks against Avdiivka and began to move more reserve assault units to the sector, he noticed. So further along the Kupiansk-Lyman axis, Moscow's troops are reportedly attempting to push Ukrainian defenders behind the Zherebets River and from the Serebyansky forest. So there's a lot of activity all up and down here. We can see that, again, this is another day just in general of Russian advances. There are no Ukrainian advances, as according to any of the sources I utilize. So up here in the Kupiansk direction, actually vaguely near to where recently the Ukrainians were having some success in countering the Russians around Avdiivka, we have some Russian success just southwest of Persho-Travnevi, east of Petropavlivka, where the last few days there have been rumors that the Ukrainians have been under a lot of pressure. The ISW, Institute for the Study of War, talks about all of this area and going down to the Serebyansky forest as there being, fair amount of activity. Here is what Noel Report says about that exact position. Russian forces advance up to several hundred meters south of Persho-Travnevi, geolocated footage confirms. Attacks near Sinkivka haven't been reported as intense in the last 1 to 2 weeks, but still occur on a daily basis. So perhaps goes against what Syrsky is saying, which is that it is fairly intense, or there are a lot of Russian forces around there. So as we come further to the south, in the forest area, we saw yesterday that Syriac maps showed that the Russians had some success in pushing the Ukrainians further to the south in the forest area, although the tweet only came out today in the last sort of 24 hours. I haven't included that here because I already updated the map yesterday, but there is evidence of that. We have Global War Monitor saying on the Donetsk-Luhansk border, Russia has advanced northwest slightly from near the area of the Crimea forest, so northwest of the forest here. Some advances for the Russians, although that's possibly from advances we've previously seen. Now, here we have a geolocation. So according to the ISW, geolocated footage published on the 10th indicates that the Russian forces marginally advanced southeast of Dnipro, and that could indeed be this area that we saw Syriac maps include yesterday. Well, what do we have? So an assault on Ukrainian position supported by heavy equipment southeast of Kazimierna, Luhansk region, and this is geolocated to this position. What I would say is that unless you see that this area has been taken, so there's one thing to have an assault, but there's another thing to say, well, that signifies that it's actually controlled by the Russians. So without knowing whether that assault's been repelled, it's difficult to make these assumptions, and I wonder whether this is yet another example of what Andrew Perpetua talks about with regard to particularly Syriac maps, which is as soon as they see Russian presence somewhere, that is them controlling that area, rather than that being an attack on this position and it might have been repelled, or they might have just attacked and pulled back, so on and so forth. We don't know if they actually control all of that area or whether it's just a grey zone. So Andrew Perpetua has undoubtedly seen that footage but not adjusted his map. Although I would have to say that, for them to be that far in front, so that's about 2.5 kilometers in front of their defensive lines, yeah, you'd imagine that they might be a little bit closer than that. Nonetheless, the Russians have attacked there. There is evidence that they have been there, and they are putting pressure on the Ukrainians, and that is a Ukrainian position. The question is it still a Ukrainian position? I don't think we know from any of the data there. I would therefore treat the Syriac Maps claims with a pinch of skepticism. Right, moving on to the south, there's been quite a lot of activity down here around Sperna and further to the south of Sperna, where Andrew Perpetua has an increase in Russian controlled territory here, moving towards what Syriac Maps posted a couple of days ago. So that is happening there. Indeed, if we come to the ISW, there are lots of claims about Bakhmut, about Vesely and Sperna, the area that we're just dealing with at the moment. So you've got Vesely around here and Sperna up there. So this is a fairly active part of the front line. Indeed, if you look at the ISW here, one of their maps, you see that they're circling all the way down this eastern front, right from Novomykhailivka in the south to Kupiansk right up in the north. So all these circles indicate the differing degrees of hostilities going on. If we come to the north of Bakhmut, Syriac Maps again has some gains for the Russians in the Bodonivka area, with Deep State Maps showing some gains just northwest of Kromova. If we go back to the ISW, Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces captured a Ukrainian stronghold north of Kromova along that highway and pushed Ukrainian forces out of several positions near Klishchivka. Although we don't have any movement on the map near Klishchivka from our sources, there is some movement here exactly around where ISW just mentioned. So just northeast of Kromova, northwest of Kromova, sorry, but this highway, it looks like the Russians are pushing the Ukrainians back along it. And then just to finish off, a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces advanced within 100 meters of the outskirts of Bodonivka and advanced towards Ivanivka and Klishchivka. So there are lots of claims that Bodonivka is under a lot of pressure. They're on the outskirts there. Syriac Maps has taken that on board and changed their mapping to suggest that the Russians are knocking on the Bodonivka door there. As well, several claims about Klishchivka being under a lot of pressure. We haven't got confirmation that the Russians have control over this trench network that overlooks Klishchivka, and so that's why you see a difference between Syriac Maps and the other mappers there. But if that was true, I mean, that is the beginning and the end for the Ukrainian presence in Klishchivka, but we'll see whether that is true over the next few days, no doubt. Right, and then coming on down south from Bakhmut, where you can see the Ukrainians are under increasing pressure, there is some movement for the Russians again, a couple of small areas of gain, one to the north and one to the east of Avdiivka. But before we go there, it's worth reminding ourselves about this area of around Horlivka. So we have the large city of Horlivka, and we had these spoilings heaps, tailings heaps, slag heaps, whatever. These have been fought over by both sides for some time, and actually, if we look, we can see that these are some, and this is not accentuated 3D imagery either. This is how it is. That's a pretty substantial mound of slag there. So of tailings. So on the one hand, it might be quite useful for getting good visuals around, but on the other hand, you probably stick out like a sore thumb standing on top of there. Well, there's quite a bit of talk about this area. So if we go to that was the Bakhmut one. So here we are. Our heroes are the assault groups of the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade, named after King Danilo, the Royal Brigade. Despite the difficult conditions, they recaptured one of the spoil heaps within Horlivka and captured the enemy's positions. Now our flag is flying over the spoil heap. Horlivka is Ukraine. Donbass is Ukraine, Zelensky said, accompanied with this video. So a claim from Zelensky there, and we have various videos here. This one just shows, turn the sound off, of course. It shows that they are, making gains around that large mound there. So, I mean, I could do the geolocation, but you get the point. This is where they have control, except they don't, because Google Earth appears to hate me sometimes. I don't blame it. It's only human. Oh, no, it's not. So that is the big heat that apparently the Ukrainians have taken control of. Now, although it is not under Ukrainian control, as you can see it, according to both mappers, it is in the grey zone. That would mean that would be a shift. If you take that as gospel, that would be a shift to the Ukrainian front lines further up to have that large heap under their control. So lots of activity taking place there at the moment. That had gone quiet for a few days. But anyway, back to Avdiivka, where I was before I rudely interrupted myself. And let's go and look at some of the Avdiivka claims. So Stupin stated, it says a Ukrainian, that Russian forces launched significant offensive operations with armoured vehicle support near Avdiivka and Marinka on the 10th, and that Ukrainian forces destroyed 11 tanks and 15 APVs. The General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled at least 49 Russian attacks near Avdiivka on December the 11th. So the Russians really have kicked up the tempo here. Now, it's interesting because people like reporting from Ukraine indicate that the Russians are kind of culminating around here, that they actually, the tide may be turning. I wouldn't be so sure myself, but there still does seem to be a lot of activity from the Russians, a significant increase relative to the past few weeks. RSW has not yet observed significant Russian gains near Avdiivka as a result of these attacks, however. Right, so we go and look, and there's the claim of the quarry down to the southeast of Avdiivka, where Surat map says the Russian army advanced west of the quarry, reaching the street of Kolsova. However, it's premature to confirm the consolidation of positions there. In other words, the Russians have been met with resistance by the Ukrainians in that area. And then we have, actually, that's going on to Marinka and Novomikhailivka. So here we have something that's more pertinent to Avdiivka itself, a geolocation of some unbelievable Russian losses. This is more of a correction from yesterday, and I used that geolocation yesterday. And this is where Russians have been hit by drone-dropped munitions over the last few days. And that suggests, that's where the fighting is. You can imagine that would be the case. So some gains for the Russians by not too far from Terikon, just to the southeast of the slag heap there. And still not huge amount of change, especially around the Stepova area, where it seems to stabilize at least for the last couple of days. And there is some activity around the quarry and the industrial area here, where Deep State map has some small Russian gains there, but not much. And as I've already said, Surat maps has some pressure being put on the Ukrainians in the kind of forest area going through to the southern suburbs of Avdiivka. Slow creeping advances that are putting pressure on the Ukrainians from all sides, though. So don't forget that that it is the screw being turned, and unless the Ukrainians can mount a significant counter attack, then it does look like effectively it might end up being a slow operational withdrawal from there. But I don't think they'd want that, because it opens up these areas behind as being the points of conflict, and I think the Ukrainians would prefer Avdiivka to remain under their control for that reason. Also, it allows them to hammer Donetsk with artillery. Right, so we're coming out of the Avdiivka area and now going down to, first of all, Marinka, where I've already said the Ukrainians have been pushed back again by the Russians, as according to Surat maps, in the direction this time of Pobyeda. So Pobyeda is this small agricultural community just to the south of Marinka that was really important for stopping the Russians from being able to flank Marinka. The thing now is that Marinka is pretty much taken by the Russians, as we can see this large area being controlled according to Syriac maps. There's some disagreement between Andriy Perpetua and Syriac maps in the kind of main area of Marinka, but there's not a lot of it left. Indeed, some of the claims are that they control all but 3% of Marinka. So here we go. Russian mill bloggers claimed on the 10th and 11th that Russian forces advanced in northwestern Marinka, but that Ukrainian forces still maintain positions in the settlement, so these are still there. A prominent Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces still control 3% of Marinka, which is a tenuous fingernail grasping onto control of that town. And it'll be interesting to see, again, same kind of thing. What do the Ukrainians do here, given that if you're not fighting in Marinka, then it means you're fighting in these areas that are more operationally significant than Marinka. Marinka has no benefit really now. There's no intrinsic benefit of controlling Marinka. It's extrinsic benefit that pertains to the settlements behind it. So you want to fight there so that you're not fighting back here, which would compromise more logistics in the area and would compromise these sort of reservoirs and whatnot, possibly water supplies, and then you're getting closer to the start of this reservoir up here that's dammed, etc., etc. So I think the Ukrainians again would prefer to fight in Marinka for the same reason they prefer to fight in Avdiivka. And actually the same can be said about this next settlement of Novomykhailivka. It's the same story here. This is not that Novomykhailivka is itself important, but it is important as a buffer to these places behind it, particularly Konstantinivka. Now, Andrew Perpetua's done a short video yesterday. It's well worth looking at, but he rightfully points out that how important Konstantinivka is, because I mean it's all about these knock-on effects. If the Russians were to take, how do I get rid of that? If the Russians were to take Novomykhailivka, then that would give them this area here. And then they would be fighting at Konstantinivka. And why Konstantinivka is important is because it sits on top of this road. And why that road is important is because of logistics, and it connects Pobjeda to Vuhledar, but it's all about being able to then attack Vuhledar from similar heights. Now, the problem they've had in attacking Vuhledar previously is that they have to go uphill from Pavlivka, and they're easily seen from the tall buildings in Vuhledar where they have ATGM crews and they spot for artillery, they send out drones, and they mine the hell out of all of this area around here, so that the Russians just get utterly decimated in these attacks from that direction. So they need to do something different, and there's something different is coming down from behind Vuhledar along this road. So they can only do that if they take Novomykhailivka. So it's about Novomykhailivka stops Konstantinivka being taken, and Konstantinivka being taken stops, but not being taken stops Vuhledar being taken. So why is Vuhledar important? Well, you might think, well, that's not hugely important in and of itself, but actually, if this whole area down in that corner of the front line here allows Mariupol to be hit by HIMARS, and even if you push, as Andrew Perpetua said, even if you push the front line back here by 5 kilometers, you stop Mariupol being able to be hit. Sorry, I just got rid of that. I didn't mean to get rid of that. So this is, as you can see, that there is 78 kilometers. So that is 80 odd kilometers to a very vulnerable area. If you're going to move that to somewhere a little bit safer for your HIMARS to operate, somewhere back here, that's 85 kilometers. That is their absolute, 84 kilometers is their range. If they're going to be that risky, they can get into the outskirts of Mariupol. So the idea at the moment is that actually the Ukrainians are able to broadly hit, broadly able to hit this outer ring of Mariupol here. So they can hit stuff around there, or probably more like this actually. They can hit the outskirts of Mariupol, but they can't really hit inside it, and that's why the Ukrainians would like to get further into the Russian territory by Vuhledar and likewise why the Russians would like to push the Ukrainians back, because pushing them 5 kilometers back northwards will invalidate the Ukrainians from being able to hit Mariupol. They can also hit these roads, which is important. So the Russians would certainly like to push back the Ukrainians so that maybe that's their maximum range. Obviously, they like to push them back right to the other border of Ukraine. But in reality, you know, if they push the Ukrainians back so that they can only safely operate HIMARS back here behind Kurakova, then that would leave these roads operating in the south along the Azov Sea to be used unhindered by Ukrainian ordnance. So that's why this is all important. So we're going to go back to Novomykolivka. So Novomykolivka is important for Konstantinivka, which is important for Vuhledar, which is important for the battery of Mariupol. Okay, so the Ukrainians don't want to lose Novomykolivka. It is important. And Andrew Perpetua was saying actually this was one of the most important areas for the Russians. It has been for a long time. And, you know, it is arguably more important than Avdiivka and Bakhmut. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, the Russians are having some success there. So Surat Map says during the last days, the situation in Novomykolivka has been complicated despite the Russian army advance. Despite that, the advance was minimal and Ukrainian troops withdrew towards the town due to the approaching fight. Now, what happens here, I don't know. It'll be interesting again, like I've mentioned elsewhere, to see what the move by the Ukrainians is, you know, where do they bring in reserves? Where do they take those reserves from? You know, do they fight really hard for Novomykolivka? Is it will this become another Marinka? Yeah, so lots to keep our eye on in that area. As you can see, both mappers there, Andrew Perpetua and Surat Map, admit that there's movement there. Surat Maps is much more localized up this tree line in this area and road indeed. And on the outskirts of Novomykolivka, actually Andrew Perpetua's gains were really quite widespread. So all of this area down like that, it looks something like that, which is quite a large area of Russian gain. So that is a worry for the Ukrainians for sure. As we come down south to the ISW, come down to the southern front line, past Velika Novoselka, we're going to stop briefly at Robotina again, where the ISW says Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces recaptured positions near Novoprokopivka and an unspecified forest in western Zaporizhia. ISW has not confirmed those claims. That could well be just talk about the gains that the Russians made yesterday that were talked about in yesterday's Frontline update. There have also been some rumors of Russian gains around Novoprokhovka. That's not Novoprokopivka, but Novoprokhovka, which is nearby. It's just north of Verbove. So the Russians could be having renewed success there. Okay, so as we come out of there, we're going to come down to the Dnipro River, where, as you can see, there are no mapping changes, but there's a few things to talk about in this particular area. We'll go to the ISW. It says Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces consolidated positions in the area south of Krinky and that Ukrainian forces took advantage of poor weather to transport 30 to 50 personnel to the East Bank. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces marginally advanced in Krinky, possibly what I was talking about yesterday. We have seen activity in the center of Krinky, but most of it's a grey area. If you remember, even though the Russian defensive lines look like they're around here, the Ukrainian, it doesn't mean that right next to these lines, the Ukrainians are just sitting with their guns pointing at the Russians. There will be a grey zone between the Ukrainian defensive lines and the Russian defensive lines. And actually, the Ukrainian defensive line is only really the outskirts, the northerly outskirts of Krinky. So when you have Russian activity in the center of Krinky here, that is no surprise. They're going to be attacking there. I mean, it's difficult because there have also been claims that the Ukrainians have been expanding their bridgehead going to the south in this forest area, and yet, you know, seeing Russians in the middle of Krinky doesn't really support the claim of a Ukrainian expansion. So the Russians have advanced marginally in Krinky. It says here, according to the Russians, though. Another Mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces, maintain positions near the Antonivsky Bridge, but it's all fairly calm in that area. So if you remember, the Antonivsky Bridge is further down the Dnipro River. All the way down here, we've got the railway bridge just there, which is pretty much in the water, and the road bridge there, which is pretty much in the water. And the Ukrainians are still there. There's still a presence, but there's not a lot going on. There's also talk here in Euromaidan Press, and this came from the ISW, that the Ukrainians have gained control. So here it says Ukraine captures Veliki Potemkin Island on Dnipro's east bank. And this is this island. Now, that's interesting because, well, it's not quite what the ISW said. So the ISW said that Russians admitted that the Ukrainians had taken some positions on this island, but the ISW already had this island under Ukrainian control. So the Euromaidan Press isn't quite accurately reporting that, because the ISW said, well, actually, it was already under Ukrainian control. Nonetheless, there is Ukrainian presence there, and it looks like they're expanding their control. I'm not quite sure what's going on. I don't know whether this counts as it technically is a separate island. So this is probably what's the name of that place? Bilyardove Island, although that's probably this one to the south of there. But nonetheless, activity going on southwest of Kherson city itself. If we just take ourselves back up to Krinky, though, and concentrate on this forest area, because I was talking about how there was an awful lot of lost equipment around Krinky, about how many Russian vehicles have been blown up with a huge amount of Ukrainian drone activity. And I showed you the video of someone driving just down one of these sandy roads in the forest areas, and you could see him passing lots of Russian equipment that have been lost. There are just a lot of reports that it's fairly similar to Vuhledar, or, they've lost just a large number of pieces of equipment, the Russians. No report says Russian forces advance up to several hundred meters south of that's the wrong one. That's the wrong words. That's a bit weird. It's not referring to that map. So no map changes. Both Russian and Ukrainian sources report a new counterattack from Russia in Krinky. It ended up in Russian losses. Out of 10 pieces of heavy equipment, 5 were lost: a tank, a BTR-82A, and 3 BMD-2s. The Ukrainian have reportedly around 300 men inside Krinky and its surroundings. That's the same, though, that it's been for sort of 6 weeks, so I don't know that that's anything to get excited about. There are, as you can see here, reports from both sides confirming a failed Russian attack. A source said that, actually, I went through yesterday, supported by more footage coming out of Krinky. This is an FPV drone from Magyar striking Russian equipment in a forest area. So there's plenty of video footage you can see of FPV drones doing their thing in this area. And as I say, I showed you that imagery, that video of someone driving through, looking at lots of destroyed equipment. Now, on the other hand, we saw in the list of destroyed equipment from Andrew Perpetua a number of boats destroyed by the Russians, Ukrainian boats here. And I said either in that video or yesterday that actually this is interesting because they are able to get drones up in the air to hammer these boats, which almost goes against what is generally understood, that the Ukrainians have an electronic warfare advantage in the area and they have a drone advantage in the area. Lots of sources saying this. But of course, it only takes a bit of a break in that somewhere and to get a drone up to be able to do damage. And there'd be prodding and probing with drones. Both sides will be all day, every day. It's just a constant buzz of drones around here. And as such, it might be easier than you might think to take out some of these boats. However, there could be another explanation for these boats being taken out in the Dnipro River, and that includes in some of these little tributaries to the south of the main river itself. As you can see here, you've got almost like lagoons and little rivers and whatnot. And although it's still demands drones to be up in the air successfully, this is not necessarily a case of dropping IEDs or having kamikaze drones, but actually drones kitted out with like maritime mines or small mines for the water. So for Ukraine to successfully maintain a bridgehead at Krinky on the occupied left bank, it depends on being able to move boats of troops and equipment across the water, but they are being blown up as they cross. Russia is using mini FPV drones to mine the river Dnipro. And what you might also have here is the Russians flying in areas where there isn't electronic warfare superiority for the Ukrainians, dropping mines in, and maybe those mines float down the river. It depends, where you're talking about with regards to whether it's the main river or the these tributaries. But anyway, there is now evidence of mines being dropped by Russian drones that will complicate matters for the Ukrainians for sure. Anyway, that's the Frontline update. It's another day of challenges for the Ukrainians. My TLDR is that the Ukrainians are advancing most places on the front, but I would be concentrating more on what attrition rates are and on the political side of things as to whether Ukraine are going to get tranches of military aid, and that will then dictate how they play the next few months over this winter period. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all of your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.